would you finish this sentence? The Son of Man came doing what? The book of Luke, chapter 7, verse 34 gives us the answer. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. The mission strategy of Jesus was a meal shared around a table. The table is central to the kingdom of God. It's where we share a foretaste of the heavenly feast that awaits us alongside our brothers and our sisters. So pull up a chair, take a seat, and grab a fork. This is where we experience God together.
All right, 11 a.m., I feel you. Way more alive than 9 a.m., which is great, because 9 a.m. was quiet. Oh man, so random. Who felt the earthquake last night? Carrie, right away. I didn't even say the word earthquake and your hand was up. Well, I got to share with you guys, I did not feel the earthquake last night. I was sleeping through it, but then I felt a different earthquake because my wife grabbed me scared. I'm not going to be awkward. I could pull up my shirt right now, but I won't. And it looks as though a lion scraped my stomach. I don't need to go to Kenya to see these animals. I have marks. And she told me 5 minutes ago sitting down, literally she just whispered, she wasn't at the 9 a.m., we just saw each other for the first time since 7 a.m. this morning. And she said, yeah, I was looking at the bed sheets and there's blood there. Yeah, I have a huge scrape mark right here. I'm not joking. So that happens. You don't grow up in Southern California, earthquake. They're normal here. And yes, there are aftershocks that come after. That is also normal. That has nothing to do with this morning. All right. We ready to do some theology? All right. I'm with you, Doug. Okay. The great theologian N.T. Wright has a little book. Let me get the name for you. It is The Meal Jesus Gave Us, Understanding Holy Communion. He opens page 1, first words, first sentence with this fictional account. Just act like this is story time, and I'm going to read you guys a story, all right? You are just sitting around the table. You just sat down. It's your 10-year-old sister's birthday. Now, if you don't have a 10-year-old sister, think of it, your daughter, niece, granddaughter, what have you. Everything is ready. The table is laid. The birthday cake is just waiting to have its candles lit. There are balloons everywhere. People have come with odd-shaped parcels. He's British, so he uses words like parcels. He just means gifts. Everyone has arrived. But suddenly the doorbell rings. You rush to see who it is. And there arrived from his own planet is a polite and fortunately English-speaking Martian. It's an alien from Mars. And he asks you graciously if he can come in. This is going to be a birthday party with a difference. So you bring him into the house, into the room where the party's about to start. And after the shock and surprise of everyone, people realize he's harmless and he just wants to enjoy the fun. The party gets underway, but the Martian, who feels like he knows you because you opened the door for him to come in, and so he keeps asking in a low voice, what's going on? Why are all these people here? Why do they pull those things that make a bang? Why are they wearing funny hats? And why does the little girl in the middle of it all keep on opening up these parcels? And why, oh why, is someone trying to set the cake on fire? Every time you try to answer him, it seems to make him more puzzled. It's her birthday. You mean she's just been born? No. She was born 10 years ago. So what's so special about that? We always do this each year. What's a year? It's, well, when 365 days, it isn't with us, but never mind. But why are they giving her things? Because it's her birthday. Why do you give people things on their birthday? Because we always do, I guess it's to tell them that they're special. Isn't everybody special? Well, yes, but on your birthday, you're extra special. So why are you wearing those funny hats? Are they special too? Well, yes, in a way, they're to make the day different. And why are they setting fire to the cake? They aren't. Those are candles. But why are you lighting candles? It's quite light in this room. I can see you perfectly well. We always do. I guess it's because it makes the party special again. But why do you put them on the cake? I don't know. We just always do. Everybody does. We don't know. Why do you eat to celebrate someone's birthday? Now there you've got me. I don't know. But who cares? Here, shut up a minute and just have some cake. We're in a series called Tables, as Pastor Brock said. And it really is as simple as we are making it sound. It's really about eating and drinking literally. We're talking about food in church. I want to give you context, and I'm going to come back to the birthday Martian story. But here's, if you're new with us or you missed a couple of Sundays, here's kind of the runway so far. Week 1 was the introduction. And the point of that was just to show you from the Gospels, as Luke puts it, Jesus came eating and drinking. One New Testament scholar, right? I have this line. He says, in Luke's gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. He did a lot of eating and drinking. Week 2, point. Jesus did a lot of eating and drinking with those who are far from God. You could say that Jesus' main evangelism strategy, if you will, was to eat and drink with those who are far from God. Last week, week 3, we kind of turned it inward in the sense of the way we're supposed to do church, according to the New Testament, is church for them was in someone's house around a table eating a meal, not around a stage. Very, very different. So it's church around a table. Now, those are all kind of the horizontal dimensions, if you will, of eating and drinking with others. This morning, I want to open up a new vista before you, and that is to look at a vertical component of this practice of eating and drinking, namely, eating and drinking with God. That sounds a bit weird, eating and drinking God. Mark, what do you mean? Well, this morning, I'm actually going to talk to you about communion. If you're new to the Bridge, we take corporate communion the first Sunday of each month. So I've purposely kind of lined this one up for week 4. Lots of people come to this topic of communion with different backgrounds, and I'm totally aware of that, sensitive to it. So when I say communion, maybe you know it as the Lord's Supper. If you come from a more liturgical, formal background, perhaps you know it as the word Eucharist, and I'm actually going to get to that towards the end. If you're really like cool, hip, and like in touch with the early church, you'll call it the Agape Feast, which those actually would be probably the most theologically precise people. That is what the early church called it, the Agape Feast, love feast. And if you have a Catholic background, you probably know it as Mass. Now, this whole idea of eating and drinking with God at a table may seem very weird or odd to you, just like an alien from Mars, a Martian, witnessing a human birthday celebration for the first time. Communion, I think for a lot of American Christians, including myself, is one of those things where we're probably so used to it that we don't think much of it. Or maybe we actually have a ton of questions about it, but we've never just stepped back to ask them and really, what are we doing when we take communion? Like what's going on here? Why do we do this? Why bread and grape juice or wine? Like what is this? I think it's okay to act like a Martian this morning and to step back, what is going on with this meal? Some of us, communion is completely foreign to us. We don't understand it, and if that's you, this is going to be a great, great morning for you. One thing to point out that's interesting historically is that in the first century, the Romans, or pretty much everyone who wasn't a Christian at that time, when they looked at the early Christians, for them, it was like they were an alien, and they looked at it, and the early church was actually called cannibalists because outsiders saw what they were doing, and they talked about eating this prophet's flesh and drinking his blood. I mean, literally, and so the Romans were like, dude, these people who are part of the way, they didn't call them Christians, that is a later on thing. These people part of the way, they're cannibalists. They're talking about eating this Jesus of Nazareth's flesh and blood. That's weird. We have this written down for us historically. Now, obviously, the early church weren't cannibalists, okay? I think we all know that. But you have to understand that was the viewpoint expressed. The other thing I want to point out right away is this. A lot of American Christians, this is the way I was raised. And it's no one's fault. It's just the church culture I grew up in. Communion was treated as a very kind of, I would say, optional, minor sidebar thing. Like, oh, communion, oh yeah, we do that a couple times a year. Like, it wasn't a big deal. And you gotta know that historically for the early church, communion was actually probably the number one core practice of the way. Literally, they organized their gatherings around the Lord's Supper. And that's what we're gonna see. So, and there are other traditions that do this better than a lot of Protestant ones where communion, it's a big deal for them and it should be a big deal. And so I wanna say that right away that like a lot of us probably grew up with this, oh, communion, we're so used to it, oh, this is a minor thing, a little thing, oh, we just do this once a month. And that's just not the way that the early church was formed. And so I want us to look at this practice this morning, central to the early church, eating and drinking with God and with others around this core practice of communion, which we will take about 3 hours from now. Okay. All right, let's go to the scriptures. Luke chapter 22. If you need a Bible this morning, we got orange ones underneath your chair, page 720. Luke chapter 22. We've been spending a lot of time in Luke. Like as one author puts it, he titled his book, You Can Eat Your Way Through Luke's Gospel. That's how pertinent this theme of eating and drinking is in Luke's biography of Jesus. So if you want to go right to the beginning of where the Lord's Supper comes from, Luke 22 is a place that you can turn. We're going to start at verse 7, and this will be our guidance this morning. Here it is, verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb, and Passover is central here, so this is a big deal. Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. And so Jesus sent Peter and John saying, go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover. Well, where do you want us to prepare for it? They asked. He replied, as you enter the city, this is Jerusalem, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. And follow him to the house that he enters and say to the owner of the house, the teacher asks, where is the guest room? Where may I eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large room upstairs, all furnished, all from IKEA. Make preparations there. They left and they found things just as Jesus had told them, and so they prepared the Passover. And when the hour came, Jesus and the apostles reclined at the table. In the ancient world, this is how you ate. You recline, kind of like when you're like half asleep on the couch, but that was normal for them. And he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God. And after taking the cup, he gave thanks and he said, take this and divide it among you. For I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took the bread. He gave thanks and broke it. And he gave it to them saying, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you, and we'll stop there. Central to first century Jewish faith, which Jesus thoroughly Jewish, his disciples thoroughly Jewish, was this huge, and that, I cannot overemphasize that, huge annual festival called Passover, all right? You may ask, what was Passover like? Describe it. Thanks for asking. It was a very joyful meal. Again, it's a festival. Festivals are fun, high energy, upbeat. And this was also a pilgrimage, right? Most Jews did not live in downtown Jerusalem, but if you were an Israelite, you made the trek, which wasn't an easy one, by the way, right? They don't have Teslas and all this kind of stuff. They take their pilgrimage to downtown Jerusalem every spring. It'd be either March or April for us to partake of this huge Passover festival. The best way I can describe it, and it's not perfect, but it'll help, is kind of what 4th of July is like for us, is what Passover was for them, because this was a huge freedom party. There's a freedom celebration. In a lot of ways, this is like Israel's birthday as a nation, right? Which is why I use the birthday analogy in the very beginning. So this is kind of like their 4th of July. And everyone would gather. They'd go to a house, a home, room, wherever. And this is how they would start Passover. The head of the household, the father, maybe the grandfather, would open it up. And then a little Jewish boy would always ask a particular question towards the beginning. And the question would be this: why is this night different than all the other nights? Why is this night different than all the 364 other nights of the year? And in response to that question, then the father or the head of the household would begin to rehearse the Passover story. Now, if you were here at the bridge earlier in the year, we went through Exodus. And Exodus has the Passover story in it. Exodus 12, I'm gonna go there in a couple minutes. And so what the father would do in response to this little boy's question is he would take the group back in their imaginations to Exodus, and he would say, hey, our ancestors, us today, we were enslaved to Egypt and to Pharaoh. We were working hard, manual labor, sun beating on our backs, sweating. We were enslaved for hundreds of years. And then Yahweh, our God, came and rescued us and set us free. And the way that he set us free and rescued us is that he said, hey, take a lamb, kill it, sacrifice it, and take the blood of the lamb and put it on your doorposts. And every doorpost in Egypt that has that blood on it, Yahweh will pass over, hence the name Passover. And whoever has that, they will not be touched. But whatever house doesn't have the lamb's blood on it, the firstborn will be killed. Very serious stuff. This is literally the story of Passover. That's why it's called Passover. And so Israel was set free. They became a nation of their own. They came out of bondage to Egypt and to Pharaoh. Then you know the story. They go through the Red Sea, the water parts, they walk through it. They wander in the desert for a really long time. And then eventually they get to the promised land. That story was retold every Passover, starting with the question of what makes this night different than every other night? Now, all of this, just so you know, Exodus chapter 12, I'll read a couple of verses for you. Verse 14, this is the day you are to commemorate for the generations to come. And notice these words, like I'm reading this on purpose. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. Skip down verse 26, 27. And notice this. And when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians. So, Luke 22, this is what Jesus and his 12 disciples, they're in a room of a house, and Jesus is rehearsing the Exodus story, the Passover story. And you gotta know that this was a meal. I mean, my main point this morning is we think of Passover as this: a cup and some bread. No. They're over a huge long table having a festive meal. Very different than that. And the food was very purposeful and it had profound, deep symbolic meaning. Now we call this a Seder meal. We'll put up a picture. Now I'm not claiming that this is authentic, but it kind of gives you the gist of it. Let me just give you a couple examples. Top right-hand corner, you have what's called unleavened bread. Why unleavened bread? Well, Israel had to escape Egypt so fast that they did not have time for their bread to rise, yeast. So they left with unleavened bread. And so they would eat that as a reminder of how quickly they had to get out of Egypt. Let me point out two other things for you. They had to eat as a part of this Passover meal, bitter herbs. The type of bitter herbs, like you put them in your mouth and you start choking and your eyes water like cutting onions. Why bitter? To represent the bitter life that they lived as slaves. Not an easy life for hundreds of years. And then you'll notice top center, that is a roasted lamb shank bone, which represents the sacrificial Passover lamb. You see the meaning and significance here. So Jesus, acting as the head of the household, presenting over the table with his 12, maybe some more people there, he's rehearsing this Exodus Passover story. This is told every year in the springtime, super normal. 12 disciples, they would have grown up as good Jewish boys. They would have had these words memorized by then. They would have expected this. But what? Verse 19. And Jesus took bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them and said this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way, after the supper, he took the cup. By the way, there have been like 4 cups of wine as a part of this meal, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. Whoa. Jesus is saying, my body is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Jesus' blood? Jesus' blood poured out for us? Okay, hold on. Jesus, have you had too much to drink? Again, Passover meal, 4 glasses of wine. Okay, maybe his disciples have. Maybe they're not hearing him correctly. Maybe Luke is just being a little kind of generous, a little off, doesn't remember it as clearly because he had too much wine. No. This is exactly what we think it is. Jesus is turning their world and this meal upside down. Because what he's doing, and it doesn't get more radical than this. We don't understand it. This was crazy. This was intense table talk. Jesus is saying, hey, the sacrificial lamb in Exodus 12, the Passover story? Yeah. That's actually me now. My body is broken and sacrificed, and it's my blood poured out for you, which is actually the ultimate and true and deeper Passover. You don't need freedom from Exodus from a country, from the Roman Emperor now. No. You need freedom from the ultimate and deeper thing of sin, evil, and death. And I am reconstituting this freedom meal. This celebratory annual festival is no longer around Exodus 12. It's around my body and blood. He reorganizes and recenters this annual Passover meal and gives it new and deeper meaning. He says, this is the true and deeper celebration meal from here on out. Luke 22:19, do this in remembrance of me. And I want to highlight the do this. Again, remember, table, festive, meal, celebration, do this in remembrance of me. Tish Harrison Warren, great book, Liturgy of the Ordinary, she writes this. Of all the things that Jesus, could have chosen to be done in remembrance of him, Jesus chose a meal. He could have asked his followers to do something impressive or mystical, climb a mountain, fast for 40 days, have a trippy sweat lodge ceremony, which I had to look that up. I was like, what does that even mean? But instead, he picks the most ordinary of acts, eating, through which to be present to his people. He says that the bread is his body and the wine is his blood. He chooses the unremarkable and plain, average and abundant bread and wine. N.T. Wright reminds us that in the upper room, right before Jesus' death, he didn't offer his followers theories of the atonement or recite a creed or explain precisely how his death would accomplish salvation. Instead, he gave them an act to perform. Specifically, he gave them a meal to share. It is a meal that speaks more volumes than any theory. It is a meal that speaks more volumes than any theory. At the center of the Christian faith for over 2,000 years, there is a core practice, a meal of eating and drinking with God. Core to your spiritual vitality is actually being nourished by the bread and the cup. Now, I grew up in church, and if I'm honest, I don't think I actually really understand communion. And really what I mean by that is I don't think I comprehended the meaning behind it. In a lot of ways, I think maybe in hindsight, I was like that Martian who showed up to a birthday party and, whoa, what is going on here? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And I think because of that, I missed out on some really profound spiritual nourishment. As Psalm 34:8 says, taste and see that the Lord is good. What if we're actually supposed to take that literally? Now, you can't obviously taste God. That's not what I'm saying. But to taste something and for it to remind you of how good the Lord is. Taste and see that the Lord is good. So here's what I want to do for the rest of our time on this topic. We got 2 hours left. I want to cover 3 elements of biblical communion that I think we commonly misunderstand today. 3 elements of communion that we commonly misunderstand today. Here they are, and then give me some time to unpack them. The location of communion, the approach of communion, and the symbolism of communion. And here's what I want to do. I'm going to unpack this. As I go through these 3, here is the question that I want you to ask. And this comes from Tim Chester's book. If your church stopped celebrating communion, what difference would it make to your life? I have never thought of that question until 5 days ago. And I'm a pastor. So just, if the Bridge did not celebrate communion, would it make a difference to your life? It's a fascinating question. So here's the first element, the location of communion. Now, this is not a trick question, okay? So just shout out the answer. In Luke 22, where did Jesus institute the Lord's Supper? All right, 2 answers that are actually both the right answer. In a house, in a room. We're told that explicitly. There's an owner of this house. We're actually told that it's the guest house. And it happens to be upstairs, hence why everyone calls it the upper room. I just want to point out, and this is a huge, for some of us, this actually will make us uncomfortable, depending on like your tradition and how you grew up. I would argue that is a huge shift for American Christians. We think about communion as coming to a church building with chairs or pews and coming forward to get a small little wafer and then a little mini cup of grape juice, maybe depending upon your church tradition, maybe they serve wine, right? Or maybe it's passed out to you, the plate goes around, which we all did that before COVID, and then that all stopped. And then you have the prepackaged communion things, which everyone hates because they can't open them, and then all you hear is I would get complaints on that. It's like, okay, just relax. We just went through a global pandemic. Ay, ay, ay. So communion in a house, reclining at a table, having a meal together. That is not, at least from my experience and observation, how most Christians in America partake of communion. But my job is I just want us to be as true to this as much as we can. Now, I'm going to contradict myself a decent amount this morning in that how we're taking communion in 20 minutes isn't going to line up with what I just said. And there's some practical reasons for that, but I'll get to that. Now, last week I took you to Acts chapter 2, if you remember that. I want to revisit it now. Acts chapter 2, in particular, verses 42 and 46. And as we look at this, I want to point something out to you. Is this passage talking about having a meal together and feasting? Or is it talking about what we call communion? Which one is it? We as scholars debate, they're like, is he talking about communion or are they talking about just having a meal together? That is the point. It's both. It's gray on purpose. Let's read it. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, here it is, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Is he talking about communion or is he just talking about eating? Verse 46, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread where? In their homes and ate together. Are they talking about communion or just having a meal together? And then how do they do it? And we're going to come back to this. With glad and sincere hearts. This is why, so we have life groups here at the Bridge. If you're in a life group right now, actually a couple weeks from now, your life group is going to take communion together as part of a meal wherever you meet. For some, that's going to be in their house, all right? One group's in the cafe, another group meets behind the stage. This is because we want to take this seriously in terms of how the early church took communion. For them, it was in a room around a table as a part of the Passover festival meal. That was how they did it. They did not do it with rows of chairs or pews and everyone came forward. That's just not how they did it. This is why I'm having our life groups do this. And here's the deal. I would love for that to become normal. If you're in Rooted, or if you've gone through Rooted, in week 10, the last week of Rooted, in your small group, you should take communion as a group. Again, it's not on a Sunday morning. It's hopefully in a circle or around a table of some sort. That is going back to Acts chapter 2. Communion in the scriptures, here's my main point, was a part of a festive meal. Leonard Sweet, in his book From Table to Table, writes this: when Jesus said at the Last Supper, "Do this in memory of me," the "this" he meant was the table. Just as the slogan for Nike is "just do it" as an encouragement to be active, the slogan for Christianity could be considered "just table it." I had never realized this till a week ago. This is amazing. When Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me," the "this" that he's referring to is gathering around a table to eat together and to take communion as a part of that meal. Do we see that? Do this. I grew up thinking, this is this. It is, but in the context of a meal. That, at least for me, changes everything. It is not just coming to a church building on a Sunday morning where you eat a little tiny wafer that some of us don't like and then a mini cup of juice. Now, here's the crazy thing about this. What this means is that to practice biblical communion, you got to be a part of a small group that meets at a table. And so this was just reminding me this is why small groups matter. This is why life groups matter. It's not just lip service. Like, there's a reason why we do what we do here. Community matters because community is actually the context that God's meal should be taken and celebrated in. That's a game changer. So in a very odd way, in a message about communion, my first practical question is, are you involved in some type of intentional Christian small group? Because that is the context in which you ought to take communion. Life groups matter, alpha-rooted life groups. That is where the good stuff happens. Secondly, this leads to the approach of taking communion. My voice just cracked, so I'm going through puberty as well. The earthquake last night got me. I struggled with the word approach or attitude. Attitude sounded kind of like sassy, so I did approach instead because it sounded more formal and sophisticated. What I'm getting at here is pretty much how you approach communion, how you prepare for it, how you're intentional to arrive. And here's what I mean. I grew up with communion, and I always thought of it, and this is probably my own fault, as kind of a somber, quiet, reflective, contemplative, almost like sad-like approach. I don't know if anybody can relate to that. That's just the way I thought it was supposed to be. Very serious, quiet. And there is a time and place for that. So I am not being insensitive or disrespectful. I think there is a time to be somber and reflective and contemplative. Hear me very loud and clear. But you gotta know that in the New Testament church, that was not the context of communion. That was not the approach of communion. You wanna know what the approach was? A huge festival. Passover, it was like a birthday party. It was joyful. It wouldn't have been quiet and contemplative. And again, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I'm just saying this was the context. Part of communion is you have to understand Passover in the first century. And Passover was nothing but a huge buzzing celebration in downtown Jerusalem. It was a feast. What's a feast? It's a party. This was a good thing to celebrate. Now you may be thinking, well, hold on, Mark. What about that famous passage by the Apostle Paul, 1 Corinthians 11:28? Paul says you need to examine yourself before you partake. Isn't that kind of quiet, contemplative? Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me ask you this. If you're going to a birthday party, do you wait till you get to that birthday party table and then go buy a gift for them or buy a card? Now, some of you may do that. Maybe I shouldn't have asked that. My son right now is 6 years old. Actually, even both of them the other day, they're already talking about their birthday. My son's birthday is April 28th. My daughter, February 26th. Actually, our second son, same birthday. I have two kids the same birthday. That's gonna be interesting the years coming forward. Their birthday is months away. They are already counting down the days. They're preparing for it. When you prepare for a festivity, hopefully, if you're going to someone's birthday party, you ahead of a time are aware of that, and you go get that Amazon gift card or you go get that card. Now, some of you, I know you arrive at the house and you start to sign the card in your car. If you know, you know. All right, but there's still some purpose there, intentionality. People in my family, we're so lackadaisical now. You get inside the house, you go to the bathroom and you sign the card there in the bathroom. Then you can, all right? Anybody here know what I'm talking about? Okay, thank you. So I'm not the only one, all right? People, oh, you're the only, no, I'm not. There is intentionality beforehand, before the celebration. Why? So that then when you get inside the house for the birthday, it's party time. We can celebrate. Let's go. Light the candles. Here's your parcel, as the bishop N.T. Wright says. Okay, nobody got that. That's okay. But you guys get what I'm saying. So Paul, what he's saying first, absolutely, prepare yourself. But prepare yourself before you get to the table. You don't prepare yourself when you're at the table. You do it beforehand so that then when you get there, it's Passover festival time. It's glad and sincere hearts. Let's celebrate. It's freedom time, 4th of July. Are you guys tracking here with what I'm saying? That is a huge difference with how you approach communion. All right. I want to point out the words of Jesus, Luke 22:15, because this is related to the approach part. I had a bunch of light bulb moments last week when I was preparing this. Jesus says this, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you. I have eagerly desired. Oh, that we, brothers and sisters in Christ, would eagerly desire to take communion. So here's my second question. Do you eagerly desire to take communion? If I'm honest, sometimes I don't. And I think that may be true sometimes because my approach is of this more somber, reflective, quiet, sad-like posture. And if that's the case, of course I'm not going to desire it. But again, that's not how Jesus approached Passover. That is not how the early church approached Passover. Acts 2:46, they broke bread in their homes and ate together how? With glad and sincere hearts. Meaning with with exuberance. Man, this is such a good quote from Philip Yancey. This table is different. It isn't where sinners find Christ, but where sons and daughters celebrate being found. Maybe someday, instead of solemnly making our way to the tables, we should dance for joy. Maybe we should sing every born-again song we know. Maybe we should tell our homecoming stories and laugh like people who no longer fear death. Maybe we should ask if anyone wants seconds and hold our little cups high to toast lost sinners found and dead brothers and sisters alive. I want to take communion like that. Do you partake in communion with a glad and sincere heart? Another biblical name for communion, I mentioned this earlier, is Eucharist. Anybody here, Mark Pickett, you can't answer. Anybody here know what Eucharist means in Greek? Oh, Timmy, you're a PK. You can't talk. Oh, I got to add you to the list. We love Timmy. Timmy is absolutely right. Oh, Timmy, let's go. Yeah, so Eucharist, it's a biblical word. Some people think, oh, that's a Catholic word. No, it's a New Testament word. It means Thanksgiving, literally in Greek. So what is communion then? It is a Thanksgiving meal. Thanksgiving coming up in about a month from now. Now, unless you got a grumpy, dysfunctional family, which if that's the case, the different conversation, okay? But hopefully you're not gonna show up to Thanksgiving. It's time to eat. We can celebrate getting fat today. That's how Americans celebrate Thanksgiving. It's very odd, actually. Do you show up to communion and it is time to celebrate? You come what? Excited and thankful. That is how we should approach communion. Again, Tim Chester for the win. The Lord's Supper should be a meal we earnestly desire to eat. We should approach it with anticipation, with longing, with excitement, with joy. The Lord's Supper should be a joyous occasion, a vibrant meal with friends, a feast. When we recapture the Lord's Supper as a feast of friends, that's what I'm trying to do this morning, by the way. Celebrate it as a meal in the presence of the Spirit, then it'll become something we earnestly desire. It'll become the high point of our life together as the people of God. And this will preach. In this sad and broken world, the Lord's Supper is a moment of joy because it's a moment of the future. Ooh, I'm going to start preaching, get ready for next Sunday's message, because that's what I'm talking about, the future. In a world of, war in the Middle East now, devastating hurricanes, and add every other thing that you watch when you turn the news on, the Lord's Supper is a moment of joy, of the lost being found. Let me give you a little foreshadow of next week. When we eat together, when we take communion, you're getting an appetizer of what you're going to do for eternity. You got to get ready. Third and lastly, the symbolism of communion. This is such an obvious question, but again, it goes back to the Mars-Martian thing. You got to ask, why bread and wine? Why? Why not steak? Why not a creed? Why not words? Why not a theory? Why not a formula? Why does Jesus give us physical substances to eat and drink? Perhaps this is why. Every meal that we eat as humans is a reminder that you and I are 100% dependent on food and drink to live. Physical food and drink are a physical necessity for you and I. If you don't eat or drink, you will die. But it's not just a necessity. Did you know that ultimately most everything you eat and drink, your very survival is dependent on something else dying? Think about that. Let me give you some examples. Plants and animals, which is most of what we eat. Plants and animals are what? They're born, then they grow, then they consume or produce, and then they have to die in order for you to eat them and thus live. It's kind of like that, I went to Kenya earlier in January to get a kind of, what is this mission trip thing like? Then went on a safari at the very end. It literally is like straight up Lion King stuff. Circle of life. This is kind of like what that is. In order for you to eat a steak, who here loves steak? All right, we got a good church. Hey, part of tables, have me over for steak. Just saying. Medium rare. My wife's well done, thing has to be burnt. My mom too, but I don't know. Anyway, for you to eat a steak, you know what had to happen? Yeah, a cow died. What about a tomato? Yeah, it was ripped off the vine. Life often only comes through death. By giving us the physical, real elements of bread and the cup that we can touch and taste and see, which represent the body and blood of Jesus, we are reminded that Jesus had to die so that you and I could live. It is because of his broken body and blood that you and I have eternal life. The symbolism of food in communion, I think I'm not saying the only one, but one of the reasons why communion is bread and the cup is that every time we eat and drink it physically, we are reminded over and over again that we are 100% dependent upon the sacrifice of Jesus for nourishment. Jesus is our nourishment. Jesus had to die so that we could live. And in communion, we are physically reminded that his death led to our life. This meal demonstrates that we are completely dependent on Jesus forever. And that will never change into eternity. We'll be taking this meal over and over and over again. Another sneak peek for next. You know how the Bible ends? With a banquet, with a festive meal. Every tribe and tongue, people from Kenya who have nothing, people in America who have too much, and everyone in between around the table, worthy, because of your body and blood sacrifice that we live. That's not something to be somber about. That is something to throw a party about. It's a celebration. It's a pilgrimage. Let's have our independence party. Well, it's not independence because we're forever dependent, but we're free. I want to invite up the worship team. So this morning, and here's where I'm going to contradict myself. We're taking the corporate communion. If you're new to the Bridge, we do this the first Sunday of each month, the cup and the bread. Now there's practical reasons why we do this. I don't have space in my 1,700 square foot house to have hundreds of you inside one room. That would be interesting to try. So there's some practical reasons, but you know what I do want to say is moving forward, life group small, we should be taking communion in our groups and homes as a part of a festive meal. That is the heart, the biblical heart of the Passover meal, which Jesus reorganized around himself. I want to read John chapter 6, starting at verse 51 for us. This is a great verse, a passage, no pun intended, to chew on this week. Dad joke. I am the living bread. This is Jesus talking. That came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I give for the life of the world. What is that? He had to die so that you could live. Verse 54, whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day so that we can eat and drink forever. For my flesh is real food and my blood is real drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me and I in them. While we don't have the practical logistics of being around the table this morning, although I'll be honest with you guys, I thought about having us rearrange this worship center this morning and a bunch of round tables, but I got told no. I want you to partake of communion this morning with a joyful, celebratory, freedom-living, festival fun posture. Because the lost are found. So I'm gonna invite up elders and deacons. We got 4 stations. Go to whichever is closest to you. If one has a short line, hop in it. There's gonna be a prayer team after communion. They're gonna be physically up here. Come get prayed for. Come get prayed for. The Spirit of God. You know what? The Spirit of God wasn't just in this. He's in this, but he's now breathing new life into you. Prayer is an opportunity for the breath of God to fill your lungs through another human being who he's speaking to give you words.